How UConn won the portal season. You're Locked On UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the Yukon Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is sponsored by Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now, free on the Google Play or App Store. Game on. UConn won portal season. Don't let anyone tell you differently. They are likely losing 4 of their 5 starters, and you'd think they'd be at the top of the guys, in quotes, of the portal, right? They'd be after those guys. No. UConn won portal season because they doubled down on retaining their freshmen from last year. A class that was a top class, some were calling the Fab Five when you add Steph Castle into it, and their staff is, and the country is high on. We all want the shiny new toy. That shiny toy syndrome, whether you call it the ADD generation, the lack of perspective generation, whatever you want to use for that. The new object. I'll tell you right now, organizations that do have perpetual churn and turnover, it leads to chaos and mediocre results. But with UConn, all along, the plan was to retain Jalen Stewart, Solomon Ball, Jaden Ross, and Yusef Singari. And when asked about that in media availability, by the way, Connecticut media, great job with Dan Hurley this past day or so. He was fantastic, really open, but some of the questions you guys asked were fantastic. Dan Hurley talked about how that gives them an edge. Dan and his coaching staff are fully aware of and strongly believe in the potential of these young players, the players that are within the program currently. They wanted to return as many champions. He said that word so many times, not necessarily in media availability, but in the past. You know, what's going to be the transfer portal strategy? We're going to try to return as many champions as they could. And they did that. Champions like Solo Ball. Champions like Jaden Ross. Champions like Jalen Stewart. And champions like Yusef Singari. All for one of the country's top recruiting classes. But also to have a foundational bunch of pieces for the incoming talent. So you have the 4 sophomores, and then you have Liam McNeely, Ahmad Noel, and I'm losing Isaiah's last name, but Isaiah from Virginia, I believe. Let me look that up because I don't want to disparage the young man. All that to say, this team is absolutely loaded with young talent. Isaiah Abraham. Totally blanked on that. I apologize. Look, when it comes to top classes, if you think about how many teams are returning that many players, because when you think about, you have 4 sophomores and then 3 freshmen, this group forms like a top tier class with championship winning potential because you have the 4 champions and 3 highly touted recruits. Forget about 4 stars and 5 stars. The players that UConn brings in is exactly what the championship formula that Dan Hurley and his staff try to put together. And by sticking with this core group and avoiding kind of excess turnover through adding 3 or 4 portal players, all that would have done is showed the players on their team and the world that they're hedging on their bets. That all of the talk about honest conversation and, you know, the demands that we have on our players, all of that would have been BS. Doubling down on your talent while still bringing in positional need is an absolute masterclass by Dan Hurley and his staff. If they started over, it would have risked losing the progress and the cohesion that they've built within the current team. And I'll say it again, ultimately send a message to the people in the program and naturally that they don't believe in their guys, and all the talk and all the honesty about, we do things differently at UConn would have been, nonsense. And if you listen to Dan, he is not about that life. He is not about a BS lifestyle. A great example of that, he was asked about Hassan Diarra by our friend Joe Arruda from the Hartford Courant. By the way, great question, Joe. What was the conversation like, Joe asked, with Hassan? And, Dan is nodding and doing his media availability like, okay, I like where you're going with this question. No hesitation. And I'm paraphrasing. Hassan has a new challenge, a new leadership challenge. He was the sixth man of the year, but can you get better from that? Where can you get better? With the basketball, as a three-point shooter, as a decision maker, as a finisher, as a facilitator, as a driving force for your team to reach the level of Tristan and Cam that they played at last year. Because the guards, those are big shoes to fill. And he went over how he talked to him about he made a big jump from year 1 to year 2. But now they're asking him to make an even bigger leap from year 2 to now year 3. I mean, that's as honest as it gets. Because Hassan, if he didn't have the same mentality as Dan Hurley, he could have said, go kick rocks, dude. I mean, I should be the starter. I should be getting X amount of minutes. I want my NAL to be doubled, all of this stuff. So like I mentioned, nothing is given to Haas or any player on this team. They're not letting him have his moment. As some people have suggested to me on YouTube comments and on X about him and Samson Johnson. They are still desperate for titles because once you win 1, you win 2. You don't just stop. If there's anybody knows anything about high-performing individuals, it's that as soon as they get a taste of, it's like the taste of blood. As soon as you taste that, you're trying to get that and quench that thirst over and over and over again. And just like anybody on this team, Haas and the returning players have to prove they can make that leap first to himself and then to this coaching staff. Great job by media in Connecticut with that availability. I thought Dan handled it incredibly well. It was very funny and talked about, some of the barbecue stuff that they're going to do over the summer, about how he's I think he said he was the dynamic player in their softball game. So it went from some parts, master class on how to talk about, laughing about, throwing 7 guys from the portal and just kind of sticking it on the wall and kind of seeing what fits. I wonder who he had in mind with laughing about teams that do that. I mean, for some of them, they have to because they lose every player. But if you create a culture, which we'll talk about in the next segment, typically you don't have to do that incredible overhaul from 1 year to the next. Well, we'll talk about UConn, the UConn culture, and everything that comes with it after this. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay fit only. Available to U.S. customers. Well, we talked about UConn's culture a little bit in the last segment. And UConn itself has created this incredible culture, starting with Jim Calhoun, and even prior to that, but to be honest with you guys, this show is only 30 minutes long at max. And if we want to dive into or a deep dive into the roots of UConn culture, I'll recommend a podcast for you, because this is about what's happening today. But you'd be remiss to not talk at least about the culture that Jim Calhoun started, and then all the way through the years of this championship level, trying to meet those standards. And it starts with having relentless pursuit of specific athletic and personal traits that are about players that are about winning. And it doesn't start with ratings. So if you were to go to, the recruiting sites, 24/7, On3, Rivals, all of which are valuable for us in the media, all of which are a fun exercise to see where certain people stack up against each other. But it's not the ultimate tool for how this team prioritizes its players. They value players who can contribute to winning championships rather than relying solely on the rankings. So for me, what's interesting is, as they're going through ring design, they're going about their business to try to replicate the same script, even with the ancillary stuff. This is about UConn culture. Dan Hurley specifically talked about throwing out first pitches at Major League Baseball games. Alex Caravan doing so for the Red Sox as a Boston guy, or as a Massachusetts guy, as Hurley described him. I wonder if they'll get someone like Haas to throw out a first pitch for the Yankees and the Mets in New York as the New York City guy. But culture is a word that gets tossed around a lot, and it means absolutely nothing if you don't live by it. I believe our newest transfer portal get, Aiden Mahaney, experienced UConn's trademark culture and intensity, and how hard they get after it. And what impressed UConn staff the most was how he was dying to be a part of it. The traits that they're looking for in a player, the traits that they're looking for in a recruit, a transfer portal or a recruit, are, what are the priorities? If it's about getting better, if it's about winning plays, if it's about having those athletic traits that are going to get you to that next spot, or do you think you're going to be an NBA player? Do you think you could utilize our help to become an NBA player? These are how they target their recruits. And if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening on any podcast form and you're hearing me yawn, I apologize. When I talk this much over and over again, your mouth gets tired. So I apologize in advance. But the thing that they loved about a guy like Aiden was versatility in Aiden's game. High level of respect for him going into the second round game against St. Mary's last year, round 2, prepping for him. Dan Hurley called him as good as any freshman in the country last year, but also recognized that his sophomore year probably didn't go as scripted. Also confirmed what I've talked about, which is he has a lot of similarities to Cam and Tristan with his ability to run the show, but also has some creativity, not only as a high level shooter, but creativity with the ball. So they are following the same script. They're valuing players who can contribute to winning championships rather than relying solely on rankings. Like, a great example would be the couple of names that I got in we're doing a bunch of our transfer portal stuff, is the Huskies should look at such and such a player. And I'm not even going to pick one. Actually, I will. My favorite one is Sean Stewart. Sean Stewart is a transfer out of Duke. And if you look him up, like I'm doing right now, not that I don't know about him, because trust me, he's been talked about in my YouTube mentions likely for ever since the portal opened. He's another Monteverde kid. Played with Cooper Flagg, played with Liam McNeely. He is a former 5-star. But what does he do well? He is uber athletic. I think everyone gets seduced by that aspect. And and this is no slight to Ohio State, who it said just an hour ago, they got a commitment from Sean Stewart. And good for them, because Ohio State's not exactly who you think about when you think about winning in college basketball. Football, maybe. Not lately, but look, they have Jake Diebler, who's an interim head coach who's trying to make a splash. That's a great get for him. But that's a kid who was, in my opinion, was a 5-star in name only. He doesn't come in with the pedigree of Liam McNeely. He's not a great shooter. His mid-range, what's mid-range now? Float game? Does he have a decent float game? We didn't see it a little bit in high school, but in high school, he was so physically imposing. He dunked a lot of shots. He played on an incredible team where he didn't ask to do a lot other than get out on the break and dunk and rebound. I guess you could call him a plus defender, but these are the types of things. Like, if you don't have all of the traits that they're looking for, you're not going to get minutes on this team. He wouldn't even I don't even think he would get minutes over Singari, because Singari's already been through this program. That's what people don't get. Unless you're a ready-made fit for, to be a combo guard like an Aiden Mahaney, you're likely not going to be on this team or in this program. So let's get away from, like who you like. Ask me questions about anybody. But I'm telling you, the blueprint is start looking at high-level players around the country who make sense for UConn, that aren't going to garner a ton of attention. Because even though Aiden is a top transfer, who is he considering? Kentucky, Creighton, Virginia. Okay. But there wasn't, John L. Davis, which is, the sexy name that went to Arkansas but tried to get to Michigan first, which was he's the top player in the portal, or a Omar Ballo. Like, these are players that Dan, and I'm not specifically talking about them, but the guys who are ranked highly based off of their rating or their transfer portal rating. What Dan Hurley said in his press conference or his media availability was, there's tons of players in the portal who have not contributed to the winning of their teams, and we don't want those players in our program. So he's talking about a lot of players, guys. Like, there's 1,700 plus players in the portal every year. So 99% of those players, 99.9% of those players aren't UConn material. They're not Dan Hurley and his staff's material. So they're preserving their continuity and development with their program, emphasizing the importance of retaining existing players like Solo, Jaden, Jalen, Singari, and bringing in guys who can enhance that, like Terrace Reed Jr., who we haven't even talked about, like Aiden Mahaney, who's the combo guard that is a mixture of Cam and Tristan. They are doing exactly what they envisioned once this offseason stopped. And they're having a little fun with some ring design and setting up first pitches at Fenway Park. It's great for them. Well, are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis and opinions and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, we're going to talk about what's next. A lot of stuff going on in the offseason, a little more transfer portal stuff, but we're going to kind of taper back on some of that content, and we'll talk about all of that and more coming up after this. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that in your opening, but there's so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. Then the more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. There's so much to get. So much to get. Unique stickers you can trade. Unique stickers you can trade with a friend or complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. Hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day while constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their unique mini games like digging a treasure or robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events to help you win big, like a massive multiplier for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discuss and discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on the Google Play or App Store. Game on. All right, so what's next on this UConn offseason? We'll be monitoring Alex Karaman's status. I believe Dan was laughing about in media availability about how he hopes it doesn't go as long as Andre Jackson. He said he was at his brother's daughter's wedding, I believe, in Cali when he heard about what they had to do with Andre Jackson. So we'll check in with future pros of the Huskies. I know Cam Spencer's going through pre-draft workouts, monitor where the draft board is for Steph and for Donovan Clingan. I saw today that Donovan is still be considered as a top 5 pick, potentially as a number 1 overall pick. And of course, the trolls are out that don't understand basketball. Let me tell you guys something. I'm not comparing Donovan Clingan to Anthony Davis in that Kentucky team from 2012. But that 2012 Kentucky team was so good that Anthony Davis did not play every minute of every game. He did in important games, just like Donovan did for UConn. But the fact is that 2012 Kentucky team also didn't dominate the way this 2024 UConn Husky team did. So, yeah, Donovan Clingan does not play 36 minutes a game. He doesn't have to. It's the most efficient UConn team or college basketball team of the last 25 years. They just went 37-3 and ripped through the NCAA tournament. Like, absolutely destroyed people. And we're going to sit here and talk about how Donovan Clingan's game doesn't translate to the NBA. It's a joke. And if you say things like that, you literally, just like the Purdue head coach, Matt Painter, said, you probably should have to do a test on basketball competency when you speak about things like that. It just shows an incredible bias. And I'll tell you right now, there are plenty of players that UConn has had in the past that I don't believe are NBA players that people would get upset about me saying so. I didn't think James Bouknight should have went pro initially. Do I think the Hornets made a mistake with his development? Sure. But I think a lot of that had to do with maturity on his part too. So I am not pro UConn, and I will only say good things about players. Once they leave the program, they go in the NBA, I will root for them. Every guy that's ever stepped foot on an NBA floor, I'm a huge, huge fan of. But you see the cracks. Is Donovan a perfect prospect? No, but he is 100% a worthy top pick, especially in this draft, which isn't particularly deep. That's the point. But I'm also excited about stars of stores for the TBT. Chris Smith and his son are coaching. You got commits from Ryan Boatwright, RJ Cole, Jeff Adrian, Joey Calcaterra, aka Joey California. I'd love to see more guys. I wonder if that's. I'm sure that's in the works. We've had Mark D'Amelia on, who kind of set this all up. We also have had head coach Chris Smith on to talk about his time with the Huskies before the Big East tournament. I'd love to see down the stretch as that gets closer. Maybe we can get some of these guys on and talk about the TBT as another avenue for us to support our Huskies. Some names I'd love to see is, I'd love to see James Bouknight plays in that. I've seen there have been some NBA guys that play in it just to kind of, get some run in before they re-up with, their situation for next year. some guys who don't play in the NBA, someone like Jalen Gaffney, Rodney Purvis, Christian Vital. Would love to see those guys come in. Tyrese Martin would be an incredible ad. Some guys who I feel like would be absolute cherries on top of this TBT team. I mean, you guys don't laugh at me with this because these guys are playing pro basketball, just not in the NBA. And there's been examples of this. Mike James is one where he played so well in the TBT, got some more exposure. He got another contract with the Nets. Eventually, right? Played with Kevin Durant and those boys. Look, would love to see two international players come back and play for this TBT team. You guys know exactly who I'm talking about if you're a UConn fan. Shabazz Napier, who's playing for Olimpia Milano in the Italian league. By the way, if you're going to play in Europe and you're playing in Milan, Italy, that's a great spot for Shabazz, by the way. But would love to see him back. I know Kemba's playing overseas. Come back and play with the TBT. Let's win this whole thing. I know it's not a ton of money, but it's to play with UConn alums that you haven't played with in the past. Find me Niels Giffey from FC Bayern Munich. He's playing in Germany. No surprise there. Could be an interesting summer of watching these old stars. Find me Alex Oriaki. I know he was formerly playing in the Mexican leagues. I'm sure he wouldn't mind jumping in and playing. Tyler Olander, is he in shape? Can he give me 10 to 15 minutes? Some of these guys aren't playing basketball, so could be a way to fill out a roster. I know that they'll probably add some folks who aren't former UConn alums. That happens all the time. And if that's the case, I'm going to float a name around that you guys should go get and find because it would inject some life. He's in the G League right now, and I know he's played in the TBT before. Go get me Isaiah Miller. Used to play for UNCG, did not get drafted, but absolute dynamo, 6 foot, 50-inch vertical leap. I'm sure there's some other guys you can get after too, but know him personally. Would love to see him play for Stars of Stores. Well, listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's also available on Amazon Fire TV on the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports of the day. Locked On plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now and available in the free Fire TV channels app. Look, this has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, asking you to stay locked in, stay connected, make sure your toughness meter is always rising. And as always, go Huskies.